Many of the historic cities in the Arab region still represent fine examples of living urban centers that have been continuously inhabited, reflecting aspects of the original planning and evolution over centuries. Historically, these centers provided shelter and housing, served commercial, educational, cultural, and religious functions for the residents and the users alike, while providing also economic opportunities and social stability, which later expanded beyond its borders and boundaries. However, over time, the dynamics of contemporary needs, rapid population growth, increased pressure on overloaded services, lack of technical and financial resources needed to enable better care and adequate maintenance of the building stock. All this resulted in the flight of the most affluent and wealthy property owners from the old city and their replacement by lower income groups. As a result, the historic centers suffered from overcrowding, high unemployment, social problems, neglect, and low expectations, while the historic urban fabric, housing, and monuments continue to deteriorate. Consequently, the residents, often ignored and deprived by policies and planning efforts, started to suffer even more from social and economic decline with subsequent problems. Unfortunately, in many countries, officials consider the historic cities within a much larger contemporary metropolis as slums that have many problems which are too complicated to tackle. Hence, rather than regard these historic cities as the original core and the original nucleus of the city, as treasures that need to be carefully protected and carefully integrated within their overall plan, they are, on the contrary, they are excluded. Worse, that sometimes they are considered as obstacles that need to be removed to allow for more orderly growth and modern urban expansion. In order to achieve sustainable development, planners should take into consideration the long-term prospects and potential of the city, and that includes all its assets and cultural resources. Integration of urban regeneration and preservation of the historic centers should follow the approach of the 2011 UNESCO recommendation regarding the conservation and the protection of urban historic landscape. And that states that these efforts should be based on recognizing that the local community and their heritage are deeply connected to the place. Urban development plans should be coordinated between decision makers and stakeholders, and that includes community representatives and users as part of a coherent strategy to ensure that the relationship between the heritage value and sustainable development is taken into consideration, and addressing the priorities and needs of local communities living in the historic cities, and to the steps that should be taken and followed for the protection of the heritage value of the city and the historic city and the city at large. In the revitalization and reconstruction of historic centers, urban historic centers, an integrated approach is needed based on achieving a balance between the need to improve living conditions of the local community and developing economic opportunities for their livelihood, while also carefully preserving and protecting the valuable monuments and historic fabric in these cities. World Heritage properties in the Arab region, unfortunately, have suffered multiple challenges in the last couple of decades. Out of the 86 properties inscribed on the World Heritage List, 21 of these sites are now on the World Heritage List in danger, about 24% of the total, including 9 historic urban cities. Sadly, during the last 10 years, ongoing political and armed conflict in the region have had devastating consequences on the communities and the heritage alike, particularly in historic cities. Additional threats also included inadequate technical and financial resources, unplanned urban sprawl, unsustainable tourist activities, non-compliance with the international laws and regulations regarding protection of heritage, as well as the impact of the climate change and the natural disasters. Many of these conditions are also prevailing in many regions and many countries. Nevertheless, communities living under such circumstances continue to persevere and care for their natural and cultural heritage and for one another, and also are resilient enough to give an incredible example of resilience, not only resilient, incredible example of resilience during the ongoing pandemic and recent floods and fires due to climate change in many countries. Meanwhile, discussions and reflections must continue for the heritage protection with stakeholders and to alleviate the threats to the World Heritage Sites in general, and based on the approach of the 2011 UNESCO recommendations in respect of the historic urban landscape. Especially in countries subject to such threats, to ensure that valuable urban heritage is protected and revitalized for both the local community and humanity at large.